What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to have a discussion about preparing for the Gotham Knights review score. So this is going to go over kind of where I'm thinking the game's going to land, but also my opinion on review scores in general. I've honestly stopped making videos like this. I used to do a lot more predicting review scores, and I thought, well, you know what? I don't really go based off review scores. In my own videos, I don't actually give scores when I review games. So is it really right, I guess, for me to talk about what I think other people are going to give it? But ultimately, Gotham Knights, big game, obviously a very important game to me and the community, right, and even on this channel. So a couple things to kind of go over, right? The number one thing is, do you go based off review scores? And this is a long discussion, so I'm going to really, shorten it for the purposes so we can kind of predict what this game is going to get and go on from there. Ultimately, I don't go based off review scores. I mean, I just kind of said it. I don't give them myself. When I see review scores, I mean, do they impact your line of thinking? I'm sure if you see a game that gets a 2 out of 10, right, like on Metacritic, it has like a 45 or a 50, like that is going to affect you. Same way as seeing a game that gets like a 93 on Metacritic. But at the end of the day, I really am a strong pusher of you should go based off your own opinion. And I think, and one thing I have stressed about this game more than a lot of other games, honestly, on my channel, is I really think people have made up their mind on this game. I have nothing against people being completely for this game or absolutely hating it or, not getting it, whatever you want to do, I completely respect that. But I have said countless times, I really think at this point, people have already decided. There really aren't going to be many things in these reviews that get a lot of people, right? The majority of people, let's say, to switch their positions. I do think it'll get some. Maybe there are some people still on the fence. But I think overall, most people either say, hey, I'm in, I'll give it a try. Or most people, or, whatever, people say, I'm out. I'm not going to get the game. And, maybe a sale would change their mind, but not, for people that aren't going to get it, but not necessarily a review. So that's the short of it. Ultimately, if the game gets a 7, 8, not really anything, if it gets a 5 out of 10, and again, for my personal example, if I see that the game gets like a 56 on Metacritic, I mean, that would be kind of shocking, but I'm not going to not get the game because of that. I've made up my mind. Same thing, I would assume, if somebody sees a game gets a 90, but they really don't like what they've seen so far, of it, maybe it's just not a game for them, whatever, and they're not getting it. So, again, that's the short of my review stuff. As for what I think this game is going to get, we talked about it before, but to go a little bit more in detail here, I do think this is a 7 or 8 out of 10 kind of game. And I think, I'm recording this the day after the previews went up, and my opinion still is kind of the same with the review scores as it was before the previews. The previews, I do think, overall were positive. There were some concerns in some of the previews, but nothing that outright stated they hated something, you know what I mean? But you could chalk that up to maybe them being safe, right? Maybe they were trying to not step on any toes, but I do think it leans good. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think you're going to... Again, that's why it would be shocking. If the game came out and it got like a 60 or a 65 or like a 6.5, whatever, out of 10, I would be kind of shocked. If it got lower than a 6.5 or lower, I would be kind of surprised, because then obviously quite a few things I'd imagine would have gone wrong. Now, am I still getting the game in that case? Yeah, I am, because I got to see it for myself and see if these people know what they're talking about, right? Game journalists, by the way, can't trust them as far as you can throw them in the first place. So something to kind of remind yourself of from time to time. But, you know what I mean? I would be shocked. And I'd also, honestly, I'd kind of be shocked if this game got above like an 88. I'm going kind of on Metacritic, right? They get the out of 100. So if it got like an 87, 88, 89, once you get into the 90s, now not every 90-plus game is actually a 90-plus game. There's many divisive games, like The Last of Us Part 2 comes to mind, right? And I don't care what your personal opinion is on it. I'm just throwing it out there as an example. I think that game is like a 92 or 93 on Metacritic. To some, it definitely is. And to some, it's maybe a 4 out of 10, right? So, like, it's not exact science. So, but at the same time, I would kind of be shocked, because everything we've seen of this game, and I said it before the previews, and I'll say it after the previews, it really does look like there's going to be some surprisingly good things. And I always kind of went to the story. The Knights were kind of like 50-50, like their relationship with each other. The gameplay with co-op could be fun. And you know what? Coming out of the previews, I think I nailed it. Now, we'll see when the game comes out fully, but one of the main things I saw people talk about kind of low key, like, hey, you may not be focusing on this, but the Knights are actually really good together. Like some of the cutscenes they were able to experience, they're really good. The story, we still don't really know how that could go, but, you know, it could be good. The gameplay definitely seems to be the most iffy thing with repetitiveness or just, you know, how engaging it is. So we'll have to see how that turns out at the end. But I do think this is a game that's going to have some very good positives. Positives, by the way, that'll get this game, in my opinion, to at least a 7. And then negatives, you know, like maybe the positives get it to like a 8.5 or a 9, and then the negatives maybe drag it down a little bit, depending on how you do. I don't know, do you give positive points and then take them away for every negative? I don't know how people do their review scores nowadays, but you know what I mean? That's what I honestly have thought for a long time, and I think it's still that way now, where I could see this game. If this game got a 7.7 out of 10, I would not be shocked like at all. You know, I mean, that's literally what I've thought this game is going to get, somewhere in that range for years, 2+ years, I guess, at this point now. It's just always screamed like solid game. And by the way, again, for the record, on top of all the stuff I talked about with the reviews, you know, earlier, there's also nothing wrong with the game being good. You know, that's a thing, right? Where I think in society nowadays, if the game's not a 9 out of 10 or not a Game of the Year contender, that's an issue. Now, there is a caveat to this, and it's also something I think I've covered a lot of these bases on my channel when you make over 200 videos on Gotham Knights. But one of the things I've talked about is I could understand the high expectations because of the legacy, right? Because I stand by, you know, if a game gets an 8 out of 10, there's nothing wrong with a game being an 8, right? It's got some positives, but it also has some flaws that don't even it out. It doesn't bring it to like a 5, but it brings it back from being like truly spectacular. There's nothing wrong with games being an 8. However, when you do have a game in Gotham Knights that comes from the team that made Origins, from the universe, right, the franchise of Arkham, for this being the first DC game of this, you know, size since Arkham Knight, right? So 7 years, there are added expectations that maybe aren't even fair for the game, but they are definitely there, right? That's the catch-22. It exists, and you know, I don't blame them if they come out and say, hey, we don't really deserve to have these kind of expectations being so wild. That's fair, but at the same time, it's very fair for people to think that because it's just the way it is. So for a game like this, and I have said this before, there is that added bonus that a lot of other games don't really have, right? If you're a brand new game, you have nothing. I mean, maybe you have what the publisher or developer did before it, but for Gotham Knights, it's like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with it being a 7.5 or an 8 out of 10, right? I mean, maybe it disappoints some people who want it to be a, you know, a 9 or so, but the final part is you're trying to live up to the Arkham games, even if that's not fair. That's what you're trying. That's ultimately, I guess, what's going on. It's not even necessarily what you're trying to do. It's just what's happening. So, you know, if what's happening is you're trying to go to the Arkham games, maybe you expect a 9. This game needs to get a 9, and it gets a 7 or a 7.5, right? So is that bad? Is that disappointing? And ultimately, I mean, it's up to the individual, but I wonder from like even the company or, you know, whatever, how they view it. So, you know, if I were to give a prediction, you know, 7, I threw that number out. I didn't actually necessarily mean that specific number. You know, a 77 on Metacritic kind of seems reasonable. I could see it honestly being as low as like a 72. That was a number that just popped in I got to go with my gut here, right? So the number that popped in my head on the low end was 72. 77 is probably maybe the average, maybe what I would imagine the game would kind of settle at, you know, in like a reasonable world. And then if it got, you know, a surprising-ish numbers, maybe like low 80s, like 82, 83, that's probably where I would put the highs. So that's kind of my range, maybe like a 72 to an 82, but if I wanted to give a number, maybe like a 76, 77 out of 100. Now, what's the difference between 7.7 to a 7.8? Well, you can go ask IGN that because review scores, again, in my opinion, are very stupid. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. What are you preparing for the review scores? Are you waiting on them? You know, all that stuff. Let me know in the comments below. Make sure you guys are subscribed, bell icon turned on if you want to follow or support me anywhere else. All my social media links are in the description below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all on the next one.